Where do you come in? Shortly before the presidency, or
Our first
how do you get to meet each other?
Our first encounter was with EDSA 86.
Okay.
Okay, and I think that's been featured already in his latest book, Prosper Thy Neighbor, where we had EDSA Ayala Alabang. And
EDSA Ayala Alabang.
which meant basically we gathered the people in the villages to protect his house for those 4 days and 3 nights. And that's how we first encountered one another, although we did not really work together. It was a volunteerism activity.
Okay. A community effort.
Total community effort. After the snap elections of 86, no? No, sorry, 86, February.
Right.
The disgruntled neighbors of Ayala Alabang got together. But before that, 12 brave women went to his house, and there were going to be 3 men who volunteered to escort them. I was one of them.
All right.
But the meeting was short-lived before they could even start talking, where the women wanted to ask then General Ramos, Vice Chief of Staff, to step down from Marcos, just like Leticia Hani did, or else they threatened to picket his house every day until he stepped down. That was the message I wanted to give.
Okay.
But it was short-lived because the famous call of Enrile came through, and he excused himself and ran to Camp Crame. We did not know what it was all about then. We had a scheduled meeting at St. Benilde, about 150 of us. And as soon as we had started the meeting, the news came out that he defected and he was with Enrile in Camp Aguinaldo.
Oh, and then you realized the
Then we
reason
decided
why...
to put together a group to either go to EDSA right away, or I thought of knocking on his door with Father DeSantis and finding out what it's all about. Because he was our neighbor, and we said, might as well ask the wife if she's here to find out whether there are instructions. By the time we had gathered many people at the church, and they were already being prepared to go wherever President Ramos or General Ramos then wanted us to do. So we got instructions from General Ramos after meeting with Mrs. Ramos to send people to EDSA. He actually called, on record, he actually called for people power way ahead of Cardinal Sin, but not publicly. He asked us to bring people power at 8 o'clock in the evening.
The community.
The community. Cardinal Sin called for people power
Much later.
much later, at about 9:30, upon the behest of Buchakin and several others.
Yeah.
Although prior to that, we called him through Trixie Season and Bishop Bacani.
Called
We
him
called Cardinal Sin,
Sin.
and twice he refused. Because he said, we're not ready yet, let's see first the situation. Which is the proper thing to say at that time, I guess. But it was Ramos who said privately to us, not publicly, send people around here. So a group of people went there. We were among the last because we were Paul revering the whole community, calling up each other. So we had 2 more batches that were supposed to go to Camp Aguinaldo to EDSA. And no sooner had we planned to leave, I received a call from Mrs. Ramos saying, General Ramos is asking if we can have people here in the house.
In front of the house.
In front of the house.
Okay.
So several people went straight ahead with EDSA. 14 of us got left behind.
No surprise that FVR would break away. I mean, given his role as he was one of the chief implementers of martial law during the Marcos administration. No.
We were not, because FVR developed a reputation of being steadfast, being upright, being honest, incorruptible, and all that. No? So he had a different character impression given to many of us, and not only because he was our neighbor, but because we saw his credibility. He had a lot of credibility with the people then. Of course, there was that question: where was his loyalty? And eventually, he proved his loyalty was not to the commander-in-chief then, who lost already his credibility, but to the people as a nation. That's why people power became his battle cry, because he believed in the power of the people more than the power of any one person to rule the country.
He was your neighbor for how long until you realized that he was your neighbor?
Oh, we've been there. We were there in '93. We were one of the early birds in the village. He was already there.
All right.
So we knew that he was living in the village, but we did not see each other as often as we did after 86.
Well, you just knew that, oh, this
No,
high-ranking military officer.
Yeah, he was General Ramos to us.
Mm.
We respected him. We looked up to him. We didn't know him that well then. We didn't know his nuances. The way his tobacco would go from left to right on certain instances. There's something interesting that happened that you would call it coincidental or serendipity. Right after the 89 coup rather, Mrs. Ramos called us early morning and asked for some more protection for the family. And we said, yeah, we have some more safe houses where you can keep the family, because that was the most critical coup attempt of the ONASA. Again, we took care of the village security. That was the time when we had about 2,000 refugees from Makati, from the villages, from the exclusive villages, because the rebels took over Makati and were shooting artillery, firearms all over Makati, creating havoc. So there were many people living in the villages, San Lorenzo, Ordaneta, Dasmariñas, and Forbes Park, who got scared. They didn't know where to go, so we took about 2,000 of them that day and processed them and distributed them to the different neighbors.
Ano yun, parang naging safe haven yung...
Naging safe haven yung Ayala, Alabang. Right, when of course we almost lost that, except for the friendly persuasion of the jet fighters of the U.S. Air Force.
Yeah, that particular coup.
Right after that, we were watching TV and President Ramos, or then General Ramos, was being interviewed online together with Senator Rocco, who was live. And he was saying, I have 3 principles that I want to talk about. The first principle is civilian supremacy over the military. Nobody questioned that. The second principle, he said, was we should already limit, if not remove, the political intervention of politicians in the military. Rocco, Senator Rocco, reacted to that vehemently, if I may add. So he engaged General Ramos then in a debate. It became so strong and so furious that the announcer, the MC, decided to call for a station break. By the time they came back on air, President Ramos was no longer on air. So there was a missing third principle.
And that was?
By chance, he stayed in Camp Aguinaldo for the duration of several days. On our way home one night, my wife and I, we saw the convoy of cars led by his car going back to Alabang, and we followed it. We followed it all the way to the village. At that point, we still did not know each other very well. We were just a neighbor. He probably heard of us as the person who took care of his family, but that was all. For 6 years, we did not even ask anything from him. But 89, we had to lakas loob, go to his house. We were allowed to enter his house, and we engaged him in conversation, my wife and I, Annabelle.
Yeah.
And I brought up the topic of the missing third principle.
All right.
And I said, sir, you said, first, civilian supremacy over the military. Second, that we must remove the intervention of politicians in military, which got you in a strong debate with Rocco. But there's a missing third principle. Sabi niya, yes, I know what I said. May I hazard a guess what that might be? Go ahead, he says. That in case civilian rule breaks down, the military can take over. All of a sudden, his cigar went from left to right, left to right. He was in deep thought.
Yeah.
Then he said the following, which I will put on record.
Okay.
He said to me and my wife, we cannot grab power. Power cannot be grabbed. Because power that is grabbed will be grabbed and grabbed again, and we will just turn out to be a banana republic. So we kept quiet. We engaged him in further discussions. And then we left. On the way out, at the gate, my wife says, Tony, we just met the next president of the Republic of the Philippines.
Si Miss Bell palang
She said that
nag-prophecy
prophetically December of 1989. Soon after that, because of what happened, we've anticipated that we would become a weak economy after that 89 coup. We still had 1990, 1991, 1992, 2.5 years to go. Tony Carpio, who's now Justice Carpio, called me and says, "Tony, let's have a meeting."
Okay.
We were
You had any idea?
active during the first quarter storm days.
Yeah.
Edgar Hobson was my seatmate and classmate since high school. Eman Lacaba, who turned rebel, the NPA, the brother of Pete Lacaba, was also my classmate in college. And I was with that group of people who were very rally-oriented, so to speak. But I could not join the streets because I'm an only son and my father was an Ilocano. So,
Okay.
anyway, at that time, Tony called me and he says, "Tony, we have to cross the line. We have to shed off our Barong Tagalogs and be again concerned about the reform of this country." So he made a list of the reforms that we were going to go through, and he asked me.
He made a list.
He made the list.
Justice Carpio.
Justice Carpio made a list of the areas of reform. I mean, it covered everything in society, of course, from education, peace and order, to corruption, etc. But he says, "Can you get us in touch with General Ramos? Because I know that you know him." I said, "But I know him as much as I have only served him, but I have not asked anything from him." But he says,
But you were all acquaintances. I mean,
we knew
all neighbors.
we knew one
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
I knew him as General Ramos. I knew him as the Chief of Staff. I knew him as Secretary Ramos. But we were not as close as we are now.
And he knew you and Miss Bell as, there are neighbors.
There are neighbors.
They helped us out in '86. And then, Attorney Carpio is Attorney Carpio. Diba?
Well,
Again,
the
one
funny
of our
thing is that
neighbors.
he did not know us at all.
Really?
When '89 came and Tony and I got into this conversation, we used as a reference Teddy Benigno's columns, Teddy Man Benigno's columns. Teddy Man was already hinting at President Ramos, at General Ramos as the possible next presidential candidate.
Okay.
So we read in between the lines and he said, "Do you know Teddy Benigno?" I said, "I know of him as much as you do."
Yeah.
And he says he may be our connection to get to General Ramos to try to talk to him about his ambition. At that time, Toby, General Ramos was keeping quiet. He has this habit of keeping many of his cards close to his chest. So he did not reveal any of his plans to practically everybody except for maybe a very, very few people.
Very, very small group.
Very small group like General Almonte was his, I called him ideological soulmate. And so we didn't know the setup, so to speak. We just wanted to help. We wanted to do something for the country. And we felt that he could be the next leader. So I said, "Tony, let me pray about it."
Okay.
Prayers always work.
Okay.
So I threw the request up in the air and I said, "If this must be, guide us." I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. So I was not surprised that we found a way to connect to Teddy Man Benigno. Guess how?
How so?
I'm a chartered member of the Ayala Alabang Rotary Club.
Okay.
They announced that Teddy Man Benigno will be our next speaker around January, early February. So about 2 to 3 weeks passed, and I had no way of connecting to Teddy Benigno, but the Holy Spirit brought him to us. So I called Teddy Man Benigno and I said, "This is who I am, this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do, we're interested in helping. We know that you've been hinting at General Ramos as a possible presidential candidate. Can we meet with you before your talk at the Rotary Club?"
Okay.
And he accepted my invitation. We met for about an hour and a half.
And who were you with?
I was just alone.
Okay.
So I expressed to him what we wanted, what we felt the society needed, the reforms that Tony and I talked about. At that point, President Ramos or General Ramos didn't know Tony Carpio yet. And there's a funny incident that goes with that too, about Tony Carpio, and they're getting to know each other.
All right.
So
We'll get to that later.
We'll get to that later. I depend on how much time you give me.
Sige lang.
So Tony Carpio pointed out Benigno was brought to us by the Holy Spirit, and I will claim that. Okay, I didn't do anything to make that happen. It just happened. And Teddy Man Benigno acknowledged the invitation. We talked, and I said, "You may want to check us out by calling General Ramos," which he did. And these are the words according to Teddy Man Benigno that were given by Ramos to Teddy Man. He says, "Oh, Tony ABAYA, he's my neighbor." He said, "Do gooder. He's a short man with a big heart." I'll never forget his statements about me. So I said, okay, that's good enough for me as a recognition. So Teddy Man went through his speech, and then we booked an appointment with General Ramos. Teddy Man, myself, and for the first time, Tony Carpio met him, and they met each other.
Okay.
We talked about General Ramos's thoughts about what was going on. Remember, at that time, '89, our economy was in doldrums. We had just recovered. We were the sick man of Asia. Didn't have a roadmap for where the country was going to go.
Right. And we were getting our brownouts already.
No,
as early as that time.
We were slowly getting our brownouts. It got worse when he sat into office. So parang wala na masyado nangyari. And I guess Tita Cory was just tired of too many coup attempts in her administration. And she got weakened by she probably lost a lot of the motivation to push harder. Nonetheless, the politicians, the traditional politicians, saw the opportunity to really, again, manage the country the way they used to manage it, which was different from the way Ramos thought the country should be managed, and which we agreed with his style of management. So long story short, we met with General Ramos, and by the time we left his house, Teddy Man Benigno said to Tony Carpio and myself, "Tony, two Tonys, he just gave us a signal that he's going to run."
Nabasa siya ni ano?
Nabasa siya ni Teddy Man Benigno. Apparently, they had been meeting separately through another group. Now, since there were two groups meeting with him, with General Ramos, he says maybe it's about time. He told General Almonte that we put the two groups together. The Alabang group, which was consisting mainly of Tony and me first, and then later on several others. And then the group that had been meeting with him, which included Teddy Man Benigno, Boy Saicon, and several others.
Wednesday group or something.
That was that's
the
different
Gorman.
Wednesday. That's a weekly group of the SOG, Special Operations Group. The Wednesday group is another group that met separately. Anyway, it was that. So after those days,
So they brought you
they
together.
brought us together. There was a significant moment of meeting General Almonte at the house of Colonel Pio Roda, Cesar Pio Roda, which who was our neighbor too, next door neighbor, in the same street. And the minute General Almonte came in, I was a victim of fake news coming, or the negative news on him as a sinister person involved with the Big Bird incident.
Of General Almonte.
But I knew his kapartner do sa Big Bird, si Michael de Guzman, who was with me in college days. And I was comfortable with him. So at that point I said, I should not believe what was written in the media. Because if Ramos brought him in, he must trust him. So right there and then I said, I must transfer complete trust on this man. Not knowing who he was to General Ramos, the ideological soulmate.
That's how strong the charisma or the impact of FVR was on you? I mean...
From a trust standpoint, yes. Because we believed in his character and his track record. He proved it. So, long story short, that was the start of our getting together on a weekly basis. One day, General Ramos called me and says, "Tony, can you come over to the house?"
Okay.
And he had only one question in mind. He says, "Who is this Tony Carpio that you brought to me?
Okay.
How is he related to Joker Arroyo?" Because at that time there was still some distancing between the military and the executive branch of that was being led by Joker Arroyo. So I said, "Sir, to my knowledge, although they're lawyers, to my knowledge, they don't have any commonalities." Then it struck me. I said, "Did you get that from your intel group?" Sabi ko, "Why?" I'm assuming that they're equating Tony Carpio to Arroyo, Joker Arroyo, because their office is in LTA, Lourdes T. Arroyo, who is the mother of Mike Arroyo, who is from Iloilo or from Visayas as opposed to the Arroyos from Bicol. They're not related, sir. Napailing si General Ramos siguro. Kanya palpak yung intel. But that was, he just wanted to check it out.
Yes.
That was part of his intel to make sure there was no relation. So
Yeah.
from then on, he accepted Tony Carpio. Tony volunteered to take care of his legal concerns. So not surprisingly,
Which was his area of...
he showed his brilliance as a lawyer and became the presidential legal counsel.
Yeah, eventually.
I volunteered my background as a marketing person. Specifically, I said, one tool that I can provide you as a marketing person is you need research and surveys. So I ended up one day with Charlie Tanyega doing the mother of all surveys,
There you are.
which is consisting of about 65,000 respondents, where even Mahar Mangaha had to call me and said, Tony, what is this I hear that you run a survey of about over 60,000 respondents? How crazy can that be? You only need, if you know your surveys, you only need a statistical sample of about 1,200 to 1,500. I said,
Right.
Mahar, you're correct. I know what you're talking about, and I do not disagree with you. But we're not out to measure the national data. We're out to measure every district with a base of about 300 respondents each. 300 times 200 is 60,000.
Right.
And I said, if from there we can derive the national figure, then we have a better figure.
Each congressional district. I was actually going to get into that, the inception of the mother of all surveys.
You've heard about that?
Yep. So the focus was actually to find out potentially how strong FVR would perform per legislative district. Was
Yes,
that,
yes. But that was also partly to be used as a tool for analyzing his strengths and weaknesses by district, but also for propaganda purposes. SIWAR. He's a SIWAR expert. Okay, so in fact, just to go back to the EDSA days, when we were protecting his house, the reason why we ended up really protecting his house with an EDSA at Ayala, Alabang, was because at about 4 o'clock in the morning, or Sunday morning after the Saturday withdrawal of support, excuse me, a reporter asked him, Sir, how's your family in Ayala, Alabang? Immediately he said, oh, they're okay, they're being protected by 500 of my neighbors. That was the signal that created EDSA Ayala, Alabang. Otherwise, we would probably have gone to EDSA right there and then in the morning.
Everyone else.
Okay, but
yeah.
when he said that, I looked around, there were only 14 of us. And one of them was King Doromal, whom I hurriedly picked up from his house, wearing his pajamas. King Doromal was the president of Silliman University and was a colleague of mine at Procter & Gamble. He was our director. So I pulled him out. He stayed in the car. And early morning, they all disappeared, and I had to go to the ABA president, Mr. Adolfo Duarte, and I want to put this on record, that I spoke with him, and I asked for 2 security guards, and he says, no, I cannot afford to give you security guards. I said, well, Mr. Duarte, not Duterte. I said, your job is to protect our homes and our lives. Our homes are not moving from where they are right now, but our lives are on the street. The least you can do is send 2 security guards to be with us. So he did, he complied. Following morning, nawala na. And I had to go back to him. That was Sunday, I had to go back to him and I said, we have to really by that time, we had already started gathering enough to prove that General Ramos's statement was true, no longer a SIWAR. We filled up his house with about over 500 residents with the help of Father DeSantis, who rang the bells of the church. And we opened the gates, but we had to control the gates. So he said, we have to close all the gates except for 1 gate. We had 4 gates. So I told the ABA president, Mr. Duarte, I said, let's close all the gates except Madrigal and control the inflow of traffic and people, but allow the people who want to go to Ramos's house to be there. And his famous lines, which I put on record, Tony, you cannot do that. This is a golfing day. What will the golfers say? I said, damn your golfers. This is a revolution. But at that time, he was the president of the village. Unless he really deployed security guards, I couldn't do that. But I thought of a solution. I went to Enrique Sobel, who was the barangay chairman.
Okay.
And he entertained me and even volunteered to give the Ramos family safe haven in his Batulao enclave. I put this down on record already. But si Enrique Isabel went to the house of Mrs. Ramos, offered his services, and said, anytime you need to be pulled out, we'll work out a plan with Tony here and his group, and I'll fly you out myself with a helicopter, which I will fly because he's a pilot, and I'll keep you safe in Batulao.
Wow.
The Ramos family says, no, we'll just stay here. So we had to get reinforcements. At one point in time, we had about 1,000 people guarding the house of Ramos.
EDSA, Ayala,
Alabang. They brought food, they bought soft drinks, they bought umbrellas. There were people who were in wheelchairs. There were pregnant women. There were women who were PWDs who could not go to EDSA, and they just gave their share.
And this was very similar, actually, to what was happening.
And an expression of indignation against the dictatorship.
It was a mirror of what was happening.
It was definitely a mirror of that. And there were people who were within the area who heard of the protection that was needed to the Ramos family. So they just kept replacing one another. We never ran out of people, nor food and drinks in the house of Ramos.
Surprisingly.
Very surprisingly. So that was now moving fast forward. We had a lot of meetings for 1 year or so, and while we were watching what was happening with Pinatubo, etc., during those days. At one point in time, there was in one of our meetings.
Nagretiro na siya from the AFP, and then he became Secretary of National Defense.
Yeah, at that point he was already Secretary of National Defense.
Okay.
So during the 2 years from 1990, 1991, there's a lot of regular meetings every week just to assess the situation. Teddyman Benigno, binansagan siya, he called him the horseman that would bring us to the new frontiers. That was how we called him HM. That was our code name for him. HM. That was our code. Whenever we talked to each other and referred to him, we just called him HM.
Not
the horseman.
FVR,
no, we called him the horseman. But the concept of the horseman was Teddyman Benigno's articles that talked about the need for a horseman to bring us to the new frontiers. Okay. So that was...
So nag-germinate na talaga yung FBR
the support
was a potential candidate, diba, that you were willing to support.
Oh, we were willing to die for him at that time and give him our support. Because this country needed to be revived. We were still a fledgling democracy. And Tita Cory was hit with 7 coup attempts, natural disasters. So it was not ready yet for takeoff. And so we had to have a leader that could have the right combinations that would put this country back on the roadmap. We saw it in him. But we were fighting a Goliath. They were called tradpoles.
Yeah, traditional politics.
So during the 1990-1991 period, there was a time in our meeting when General Almonte was proposing the formation of a United People Power Movement, which was going to be a movement to put together the forces that were willing to support then Secretary Ramos for his bid for the presidential, for the presidency.
And ito yung civil society.
Yes, and so the first question that General Ramos asked was, "That's a good idea. Who's going to be the Secretary General?" And at that point, I was volunteered by General Almonte, si Tony ABAYA. I don't know why I was volunteered, why I was handpicked. I didn't have the credentials of running as a Secretary General. But I said, go ahead. If that's what does it take? Just form it, get your board of directors, etc., etc. So I gathered several people. We first got Joe Alejandro as the chairman of the movement. We had Leo de Guzman, who were neighbors at Ayala, Alabang. So that was the Alabang group that started forming already.
Okay, there you are.
We had Leo de Guzman, we had Ruben Valerio. I got my old gang of friends, Ed David, who was then the regional manager of Hamburg and Quist. I got Glo Gonzalez, who was a Kaisahang Buhay Foundation, former nun, katulong sa tao. So in other words, we formed the group We had 15. But we replaced Joe Alejandro eventually because while we were talking, because I had to allow free expression. I did not want to tell the group, we're doing this for Ramos alone. Because at that time, it was not yet official that he was planning to run.
Yes.
We just said that we need to gather people together. So we
Anyway,
said,
create the network, I guess. Or
well, then Secretary Ramos had what he called oil spots. In other words, people who just kept writing him, egging him to do something. One thing good about Ramos, FVR, he's very diligent. And he kept a record of all of these people. Hindi pa uso yung computers, no, pero he had a very, very good record. Not to mention that he has a good memory of people too. He kept that, and I saw that in him, that he was very diligent in his record keeping, as you can see now.
There's people from all over the place, from
All over the
country.
Philippines, all over the country. And it was part of his,
And he called them oil spots.
he called them oil spots.
It's
Which if
basically-
one day you put together, it becomes a big glob. Okay. And the oil spots float in the oceans. They don't mix with seawater, but they're just floating around. So he called it was an apt description of these oil spots that are ready to get together. So UPPN was seen as a vehicle to probably do something like that. But I knew that, being a good soldier that I allowed myself to be, I said, just tell us what you want, and we'll put it together. And they said, let's put up an event at PICC. Well, we gather the oil spots. So they were able to gather over 2,000 people for 2 days of workshop seminars.
Yeah, this was a
big gathering.
broad coalition.
Broad
or
coalition just to show
representation.
that's just to show that there is also a counter force to the traditional politicians. Because at that time, what was important was for Tita Cory to see what was going on and to make a decision who she would support. And so if Ramos did not have that show of force, it would not probably have convinced Tita Cory that no matter what, he would still run, even if he's not appointed by the or elected by the LDP.
It also showed, I guess, that he had an alternative organization.
That was
against the political.
looking back. That's what I read now in between the lines. That the genius of both the Ramos Almonte combined was to make that happen, and we were again just the implementors. We were the humble servants of these two leaders.
That was very broad, strategic.
On their part,
planning,
on their part. So kami implementor lang. So we had sleepless nights, literally sleepless nights to put that together. I had to make sure that we had to manage over 2,000 people in PICC, feed them, and get them engaged in conversations. Which conversations did not talk about the presidency yet. It talked about the need for reforms. It talked about the need for a leader. So I had good facilitators whom I said, manage it very well. Huwag niyo naman masyadong gawing obvious, pero palabasin niyo kung sino talaga yung leader na gusto nila. Of course, these were people who already expressed their support of Ramos, and I didn't even have to push for it. I knew that was going to happen. So we prepared everything, all the materials, and until it was ready. Last minute, I had a good floor director. All cell phones off, please. Last minute, I had a good floor director, Joey Montalvo, and I had asked June Kitley to be the MC.
Right.
But June Kitley called me that day and said, Tony, I just noticed that you have me both as an MC, as a guest speaker, as a speaker. Sabi ko, yes, you do. I have you there because you have a role in EDSA, big role in EDSA, and I'd like to request you to be the MC for the program. He says, but I cannot be both. I'd rather be only the speaker. So that gave me a dilemma, which is, who do I get at this last minute? The nearest was my wife, Annabelle, who was used to the stage. And she was a natural for the stage. And I said, can you help me take over? So she took over, and she raraed the crowd to the tumultuous roar of people power, with the thumbs up sign. Okay? And the crowd brought him, actually they carried him on their shoulders all the way to the stage. And he gave his speech, which was basically now his first vision of tomorrow for the Philippines.
Which I think was also a summation of many of the inputs.
He had a pamphlet called "This We Believe" or something, a program of governance that he started bringing out. During the whole proceedings, one of the generals or a couple of generals, having observed what was going on, whispered to Secretary Ramos about Annabel and says, "She's effective, she's good. She can help neutralize your military image. Get her as your spokesperson." And that's how Annabel became the spokesperson of the campaign, which was natural for her.
Softened up the ano, no?
Softened up the
woman pa.
woman pa. So, and giving credit to her, not only because she's my wife, she was capable. She spoke fluent English and Tagalog and wrote in both English and Tagalog very well. And she had intelligence to support that because she was coming from nowhere. She was coming from a background in marketing, wife and mother of 3 children. So, but she took on the job so fast that people were surprised how effective she was.
Come to think of it, the entire organization, the machinery of the Ramos campaign eventually was composed of, you know, really alternative personalities to
many non-politicians.
Exactly.
Many who had the heart for the Filipino people and the heart for the country. That's what we saw, and that's what energized us and motivated us to go on and on and on with no hidden agenda. In fact, we had an agreement among the board of directors of UPPM. We will not accept a position. We're not here to accept a position in government. I stand on ground that I have not done that at all since Ramos days up to this day. And I'm glad I didn't accept any position, because working government is a thankless job. Help government, but don't work with government unless you're really willing to go the extra length, being subjected to all of the pressures, the stress, and what have you.
Yeah, no, well, that now explains why you never took on a government post.
No.
In,
Besides, I was busy doing my development work for other areas of concern for the Philippines, both to reach out to help people and to also engage in business. So I didn't want ayoko mabangka sa ilang ilog.
Which on its own is very difficult.
Very
Yes,
difficult.
it is,
So.
yeah. He didn't have much premium before the presidential primaries. Can you debunk that observation of FVR?
What do you mean? What you
He
say?
didn't have much premium. I mean, as a candidate.
He had one premium, which was he was known as the EDSA hero. That was his biggest branding, and that is why people trusted him, because he made that critical decision at the right time. If it was only Secretary Enrile who bolted from Marcos, I don't think EDSA would have happened the way it happened. Because if the reactions of the people in Ayala, Alabang are reflective of what happened in EDSA, people were saying that, kasi Enrile lang yan, hindi ako pupunta. I mean, that's not fair to Secretary Enrile, but these were the comments given. But it was the synergism between the two that made it happen. But because people trusted Ramos and knew that if he joined Enrile, there must be a good reason that people should go with him. Because there were some doubts with Enrile because of his association with Marcos, of course, and being a very critical architect of martial law, which he admitted was faked with his ambush. No?
But, well, the tag of EDSA hero actually is shared by 3 people. FVR, Cory, Minister Enrile from that time.
I think the real hero EDSA hero tag was given to Ramos. If he were to distribute the percentage, I think he got the largest percentage of perception of who the real EDSA hero was.
Which you capitalized on.
Which the campaign capitalized on. But it was not the EDSA hero that was used as a vehicle to associate him with EDSA, but the concept of people power. That ultimately it's the power of the people that can make a difference for the country. And I guess Almonte and Ramos, when they got together and discussed and said, this is our vehicle, finally went through with that. So, and Secretary Ramos, being very diligent himself, had trusted surveys as an intelligence officer, trusted surveys, but wanted to validate and cross-validate and validate and cross-validate. So he had multiple surveys that gave birth to the mother of all surveys.
That's where we go.
Now, the mother of all surveys was critical in the sense that napatunayan namin that that the surveys being done at that time were consistent, but this time we had records of all the districts.
So you actually had the capacity to predict how strong he was in every legislative district at the time?
We had an understanding, because surveys are indicative, but they're not totally predictive all the time.
Okay.
These things change depending on the time, the situation, kung may dayaan, walang dayaan, the mood, etc. So we really cannot say that it was the end all, because when you consolidate the data, then the numbers are the same compared to the others. And Polakina was the poster of Mitra, decided to compare notes, and he says to me, honestly, Tony, hindi nagbabago ang mga numero natin. Topping on the list is Ramos, closely followed by Miriam Santiago. Galloping to a third is Dinding Cojuangco. Then the fourth is Speaker Mitra. Then the fifth is Imelda Marcos. Then followed by Salonga and Laurel. Okay, so that was the lineup. But
that was as early as when?
As early as 1990, 1991, the surveys were picking that up. Right? It was very consistent. It's very consistent. And when, of course, we had to ensure that that was in fact true up to 1991, nearing the 1992 elections.
That also served as I guess, as a gauge for example, what kind of specific issues or messaging per district, per geographic area.
We actually didn't use that as much, Toby, because the numbers were so thin between Ramos and Miriam. What was done was to use it strategically. It was done. It was because mother of surveys, you cannot contest the results of 60,000, no matter how it's done. Okay, because we tried to make sure that it was done correctly. Walang lokohan, walang kengkoyan. I mean, I stand by the results of the surveys that we conduct. We are not push posters, they call it. And it was very significant for one thing. It told the country that the numbers are significant nationwide. Gave that perception. So it was call it Cywar. We achieved, nabenta na, so to speak, October, November. Akala ko pahinga na ako noong December eh. January, first week or so of January, I got a call from Malacanang, PSG. And this is where the survey became helpful. Apparently, Tita Cory was not yet made up her mind who to support for the 1992 presidential election.
But it was coming close to her birthday.
It was coming close to her birthday.
She said she would make.
Right. So she was laying out the foundations for a decision.
Okay.
But to push it back a little bit backwards, around 1991, President Ramos, Secretary Ramos then, called me in his house one day. That was early on, around, I think, even before we put up UPPM. And he said to me, Tony, he pulled out his onion-skinned appointments sheets, and he looked at it and he says, Tony, it's about time that we form the multinational forces together. I said, sir? Multinational. He was referring to his oil spots. But his point of reference for the multinational forces was the Iran-Iraq war going on at that time, where the multinational forces of the world were put together to help.
That became his code.
That became his code. Sabi ko, what do you want to do, sir? Sabi niya, let's put together the oil spots and call them for a meeting in Tagaytay. That meeting in Tagaytay in his residence was very significant because that was the day that he announced to the group that he was joining the LDP. Okay? That was the day that everybody felt oh wow, here we are trying to put together a third force to combat the traditional politicians, and we're going to join the politicians and be with them and stay in bed with them.
That
Yeah.
didn't sit well, you know.
He
with
didn't
that-
sit well
that
with
coalition,
everybody,
no?
including with his sister, the late Senator Shahani.
Mhm.
But he said, I gave my word to President Aquino. And that stopped us all. So he said, oh sige, kung ganun ang sitwasyon, labanan na lang natin, laban na lang sa LDP. So he tried his best, we tried our best. But on the day of the elections of the LDP, we were bamboozled, snowballed, cheated. You may name it, we got it. In
The
Cavite-
primary, huh? The primary.
Yeah, I was with the so-called COMELEC in the office of Cojuangco building. Tony Carpio, myself, and the late Governor Verceles. And we were
Comelec of the LDP.
COMELEC of the LDP. We were there to already administer or look over the results of the day. The voting centers were supposed to open, I think, at around 9 o'clock. Even before 9 o'clock, Cavite had already announced it was 94-0 in favor of Mitra. So it shocked us. So she said, how can it be 0? We have 1 there.
Yeah.
Tinutukan mi ata ng baril eh. And no sooner had that happened, nag-snowball na kagad. It was announced in the all others. So they wanted to get a snowballing effect. And not surprisingly, of course, Mitra got the votes. Traditional politicians got together.
Yep.
Birds of the same feather will flock together. So there was a meeting in the Cojuangco building, and I will never forget that because not very many were with him at that time. It was only Almonte, myself, Annabel, and Carpio. We were there seated at the back. In the largest round table I've ever seen in my life, probably larger than the round table of the Knights of England. Kawawa naman si FVR, he was just holding his papers. And he was saying to the group, can we still not decide on who the candidate will be of the LDP? Because we were getting reports from the other areas that there were some anomalous transactions. He was bowled over by some of the tradpos who said to him, never mind, forget that, Mr. President, referring to Pepeng Cojuangco. It is obvious even with these reports that Speaker Mitra is his overwhelming choice of the candidates. Why don't we decide now to make him our presidential candidate? Now that was crucial because we lost. He gave his word to President Aquino, but we lost. What do we do next? So we had dinner, Tony Carpio, myself, Annabel, and Almonte at one of the steakhouses, and we said, let's go home and rest. We were all tired. That Sunday morning, we were just going to call it a day, kami ni Tony, when we got a call to come to the headquarters
Dito.
at Pasay Road.
Piso.
On the way, Toby, I was telling my wife, Annabel, sabi ko, can you give me words that will describe EDSA? Empowerment, democracy, self-sufficiency. Probably I was trying to coin a campaign slogan. I couldn't think of one until midway along South Superhighway. Again, with the power of the Holy Spirit, I invoke this again. Because it was not me, Our conscious and subconscious self can process it, but you can stop processing at some point in time, especially if you're driving.
Yeah.
It just stuck into my head, parang boom! Ed sa Alabang. EDSA 92 rather. The EDSA Alabang became EDSA 92.
Yeah.
So we had the meeting. Everybody was down. He came in and says, tuloy ba tayo? Sabi namin, yes sir, tuloy. But sabi ko, sir, can we push together a new slogan? Sabi niya, what's that? I wrote on the board, Ed separate sa 92. He was Eddie Ramos. They knew the implications of that. Basically, it was a message to the world, to the Philippines, to the politicians, huwag kayong magloko-loko dahil baka magkaroon na ng another EDSA. This is where we wanted as civilians to deliver that message. We were tired of the tradpolism.
But at the same time, it was also tying FVR
With
into,
EDSA.
di ba? With EDSA,
Of
tying
course, of
him
course.
with the 92 political
That's why, how can you say that
exercise.
he is not, that they say that presidency is a matter of destiny, di ba? How can you say that it was not God-fated? I saw the hand of God in many ways. That's what I seek when I try to support people. Try to seek the hand of God. Is it there? Is it going to do a lot of good? What good will it do to the country, etc., etc. So nangyari na yon. Now, in 1991, after all of that, 1992, Tita Cory called me for the first time. My first lunch with President Aquino. I was not supposed to have lunch with her. Again, as God would make it, He made things happen differently. So the PSG says, Sir, kayo daw yung gumawa ng Mother of All survey. Sabi ko, yes, why? So kayo makausap ni Presidente Aquino. Sabi ko, kailan? Sabi niya, bukas ho. Anong oras? Sabi ko, 11 o'clock in the morning. I said, okay, but all my study results are already in the bodegas. I have to scramble and look for them. Remember, the survey was in October. I had to have a 4-story building of STI do the data encoding for three and a half weeks. See, 60,000 respondents, no joke.
Correct.
Okay, it's a full survey. And we released it in November. Na cover na ng media, tapos na, napagkitaan na, so to speak. No?
The news cycle had already
tapos
run
na,
through several times over.
Binudega na namin yung resulta.
Correct.
So, when he got that call, I had to put together the data. So, I called my secretary and I said, doon na lang natin trabaho sa bahay. If you could stay overnight, let's just work on it the whole night. Kasi hindi pa masyado uso computer noon, hindi ba?
So that was an all-nighter.
All-nighter. Now, tell me that this is not the hand of God, because I never fail in setting up my alarm clock to the right time. I set it up for 8 o'clock so that I would... So I slept at about 4 or 5 o'clock. I set it up for 8 o'clock.
Okay.
But I woke up at 9 o'clock because my alarm clock was 1 hour late.
Oh, wow.
Not in ringing, but there was something wrong that happened. I don't know what. For the love of God, I still don't know what happened. I woke up 9, and I felt that would not be enough because of the traffic. To top that all, I found out that my driver was not reporting for work because he got sick. To top that all, I found out that my rule of whenever the gasoline tank is 1/2, load it up, was not followed. So it was nearly empty.
Oh, wow.
So I left at the house at 10 o'clock. I could not make the 11 o'clock appointment. So I went to the gasoline station in front of Madrigal gate. And I gassed up. And as I was rushing out with my barong and all, I almost hit a car full of 4 men, all belonging to LTO. So they stopped me, they apprehended me. I said, whether you believe it or not, I'm on my way to Malacanang. You can either stop me and delay me or escort me, your choice. I said, sir, we'll let you go, but ingat lang ho kayo. I told my secretary, Mimi, I said, I'm not going to make it. Call Malacanang. This is a 2-hour drive. And please tell them that I'm going to be late. My apologies to the president. Explain what happened. So I dropped her off at Muntinlupa market to call Alabang, and I drove all the way to Malacanang. Naturally, I got stuck in traffic. I arrived at about 11:30, 11:35.
Wow.
I had to park the car, bring all my files with me, and run like a 100-meter dasher, which I used to be. But I was no longer a 100-meter dasher. So by the time I got to the table of the president, I thought it was going to be a big meeting. A big meeting. Because I thought I was going to present to a big group. I had everything ready for me, with me. It was going to be a one-on-one with the president.
Wow. Okay.
But by the time she came in with her index cards, I was going like this. I was huffing and puffing, and she said, Tony, catch your breath. I know that you're late because you didn't have a driver. Lahat na alam niya yung storya. So it's okay, sabi niya. I appreciate your coming over in a rush. So just take your breath, get a glass of water. The waiter comes in, brings water, and spills it all over the table. Comedy of errors. We started at about 11:45, 11:50. And this is how the conversation went. I'll put it on record. He says, Tony, ikaw ba yung gumawa talaga nito? Sabi ko, yes, ma'am. What were the results? Sabi ko, before that, ma'am, can I say something? I will put my life and the life of my children and my grandchildren on the line if there's anything kenkoy in this survey. We did it correctly, to the best of our capabilities. It was done properly. I mean, how did you do it? I said, I described it to her. I'm not going to put on record how they did it because it was confidential. Because Mahal when he knew that it was by district, the only question he said was, okay, now I see the logic of what you did. How did you afford it? I said, that is a trade secret that I will never reveal in history, I said.
Okay.
Because that's a very confidential thing. Anyway, long story short, Tita Cory says, okay, I believe you, Tony. What were the results? I said, ma'am, they don't change. They have not changed. Even Paul Aquino, your in-law, says the same thing. So I said, Ramos, Miriam, but we had a survey that was so special that I had conducted, which was a good survey. Luckily, we had it. I said, ma'am, but there's one danger. Sabi niya, ano yun? There was a question, the people are talking about the possibility of Danding Cojuangco and Imelda Marcos getting together.
Yeah.
Danding worked a campaign so well that he worked from 3% to 15% by the time elections was nearing.
Election day came in, yeah.
If you add Imelda Marcos's unduplicated scores, they will beat both Miriam and Ramos, I said. Sabi ko, but of course I didn't know what was going to. I just gave her the feedback and I told her we did the survey, ma'am. Sabi niya, how did you do the survey? Well, we asked people first to vote. Who do you vote for? Labas yung voting patterns. Then we said, are you aware that Danding Cojuangco and Imelda Marcos might get together? As expected, 76% were saying, no, we're not aware. Tayong na may political sensitivities, we talk about it. But people are not aware.
No.
Then the next question is, once they are made aware, what will they do with their votes? That was the survey technique. So we said to them, okay, now we're telling you, same interview, that they might get together because of their relationship, blah, 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 with Marcoses. Can you tell us how you feel about it? So malalaman yung feelings ng mga tao.
Yeah.
Those are pro-Danding will say, yes, we want it. Those are for Imelda will say, no, we want him to be with Imelda. Those who are with Ramos will say, we don't want that because baka matalo si Ramos. We expected those kinds of feelings. Now, after you extract the feelings from the respondents, then you ask them to vote again.
Yeah, yeah.
And we said, ma'am,
Will you reconsider your first vote?
ma'am, may delikado ho, sabi ko. May swing vote towards Danding. May tulog yung dalawa. Pero, one thing we noticed is some Miriam voters switched to Ramos because of that fear. At kung mananalo si Danding, ibigay na natin yung boto natin kay Ramos.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a very significant part of this. And I explained this to President Cory, but he says, what about Orbos? Sabi ko, ma'am, pasensya na kayo, ka-age namin yan pero he's a flash in the pan. He became popular only because of media, etc. These are the words of Tita Cory, which I'll put on record again. Sabi niya, ganyan nga si Oka eh. Tignan mo, hanggang ngayon wala pa dito. Kasi kainuman siya yung mga media hanggang umaga. Hindi kamukha ni Big Mac, si Makaraeg. Na he's here every morning but he's not popular with the press, the media. Those are comments of Tita Cory. Then he says, let's continue discussing. So we had lunch, we talked over lunch. I will not put on record now on video what we talked about on lunch. I will put it down in writing at the appropriate time.
All right.
It was a very significant discussion. Right after that, I said I went home now because I had not slept yet. Remember, I only had about 2 to 3 hours
How long
left.
was the meeting, Tony?
Well, I started 11:45, 11:50. I ended up having lunch with her and Bolsey until about 1:15, 1:30.
Wow.
But right after that, I went home thinking that I could sleep in the afternoon. Secretary Ramos stayed in his house waiting for the results and wanted me to debrief him right away.
Oh, he knew that you had a meeting.
Oh yeah, he knew.
Of course he did.
So I debriefed him. I told him everything. And I said to him, sir, I think she's going to endorse you.
Oh, how did you get that reading?
From the way she was talking to me about him. From the question she was asking. That's why that 1 hour that I had over lunch was very significant.
Yeah, that was I assume the questions always focused on FVR or how it
They were all
impact
about
on FVR.
they were all about FVR, about the politicians, etc., etc. And so we exchanged ideas, and the way she was responding to the questions I asked also indicated to me that she was already tilting towards him.
So, yun na yung basa mo.
Yun ang basa ko. So she was just looking for a final decision point. And I felt that the possible threat of a Danding Imelda might have also affected her. And I would like to thank God and the Holy Spirit for having given that inspiration to do that survey. So if we did not do that survey, I would not have given that input. So yun, the rest is, after that, the rest is history.
Yeah, she was, she was doing like a V&V, validate and verify.
Yes, yes.
You think she already had tilted towards FVR?
At that point, when I had lunch with her, I told the secretary that I was already convinced that she was going to endorse him. And with that endorsement, the rest followed. And that's how we... Now, after that, when he became president, he thanked me. The one thing that I appreciated of Secretary Ramos is the way he appreciates people, the way he says, thank you. I was given one more assignment, which was to do what I call negative audit of NAMFREL, which means hanapan ng butas. Kung meron,
from the 92 polls?
From the 92 polls.
Okay.
I saw the group of the men in black, I call them.
Okay.
The group of Danding Kuhangko. They had laptops with them, and they were analyzing the results. They would copy from the NAMFREL the results as they saw it on the board. They would go home and report to the Danding in New Manila. There were only two of us that were assigned. One of them was the brother of one of FVR's close in, and he held a degree in computer engineering from Ateneo. Bright guy, magna cum laude. So we tried to see kung saan may loophole sa NAMFREL system. It was okay. And then when the early results were coming out, there was an announcement that Miriam was leading. That was Metro Manila only.
Yeah.
So I had to. He called me because I was doing the services. So Tony, what do you think? I said, sir, Metro Manila lang ho yan. May gagawin tayo. So yung ginawa namin was we talked to Josie Lichauco to use the airwaves.
NTC.
To use the airwaves to announce that this is not yet the final result. This is only Metro Manila. Wait for the provinces, especially Pangasinan.
Why Jocelyn Chauco?
She was before connected with the DOTC.
Yeah, National Telecommunication System.
Department of Transportation Communications, radio waves and all that.
Yeah.
So in-announce namin sa radyo. Nakatulong yun. One early morning, when it was finally determined by NAMFREL that the trending was already towards him, no longer Miriam, I got a knock on my door in my house. And our maid said, sir, yung security ni Ramos nandito. Kasi 2 oras lang ang tulog ko noon. Coming from NAMFREL, sabi ko, kung ano man yung pinapadala, tanggapin mo na lang. Tapos pasalamat ka. Sir, kayo daw kailangan makausap. Sabi ko, okay. Bababa ako. I had 2 gates. I had the metal gate and the wooden gate.
Yeah.
At the wooden gate, it was Secretary Ramos with my morning papers. And his comment was, aren't you gonna let me in? Sabi ko, sir, nangangalumata pa ako. Even my wife was still in her pajamas. Yeah. So we went down. He said, sir, can I offer you breakfast? Let's go to the lanay. He says, no, dito lang tayo sa dirty kitchen mo. So we talked about the long halls where he says, alam mo, I have to thank both of you and your wife. You're the first ones I went to thank you for all the work that you... That's good enough for us, Toby. Wala kami hinihingi sa kanya, but that appreciation is already worth $1 million to us. And I had that recorded recently when he came to the house, and I had pictures taken of him at his age now, reenacting the whole thing. Kasi hindi ko na reenact yun eh.
Okay.
So may reenactment shot na ako noon.
Yeah.
So, with that,
crucial yung survey, Crucial talaga yung mother of surveys na yun.
Maraming crucial points naman sa kanya na nakakontribute. I think I would attribute it to the power of God more than anything else, because it was not just one element that made it happen.
How was that survey slipped through the cracks with little notice at first? Because I remember covering a few events after that mother of surveys results were disclosed na china-challenge nga eh. And then yun nga eh, nilusot daw at lahat. I mean,
What do you mean nilusot?
or well, it was conducted supposedly under correct Charlie Taniega and
Nobody knew it was Charlie Taniega except me.
Charlie Taniega. We interviewed Charlie Taniega
No, but
recently.
that's why Charlie revealed it recently. But during that time, nobody really knew. It was only Ramos, Charlie, and I who knew what was going on.
Yeah,
And
but
how it was conducted. Did
no,
Charlie reveal to you?
not at the time. But what I mean is, there were already reports, but no confirmation as to who.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, if that is something you will keep to your memoirs, then I
It'll be
will
written
I will
on-
leave it at so.
No, the point is that we worked on it. It was a valid
Yeah, how it
research.
was slipped through. Yeah.
The results were consistent with the national. As a poster, I had to make sure that the numbers were good. So to cross-validate the numbers, I conducted an independent survey nationwide, the way we do it also statistically.
Okay.
And the numbers matched. In fact, sabi nga ni King Doromal, sabi ko, at that point, binapatikos kami ng konti, pero sabi ni King Doromal, in his usual American accent, he says, Tony, don't worry a bit about it. Nobody can contest 60,000 respondents.
Yeah.
Sabi ko,
To this
King,
day,
mark my words, as an ex-Procter & Gamble guy, I would not have sacrificed my reputation just for one survey. Says, I know you, Tony. Just sanggayin mo lang lahat yung mga atake sa inyo. Sabi niya.
Okay. Okay.
And besides, magaling na rin yung yung media group ni Ramos eh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Magaling yun sa Mangay.
I would say, and
And there were so many events going on at that time that madaling matabunan eh. Na weather lang eh. For a while, after about 2 weeks, media forgets about certain things and moves on to the next
yeah,
topic.
we had the earthquake, and then the year
Pinatubo.
after that we had Pinatubo.
That's right, that's
and
right.
Then, at about the same time, FVR was doing a lot more than the usual round of Peace and Order Council meetings all over the country. Did you notice that?
Masipag siya.
Uh-huh.
One thing I like about the secretary, the president now, and our leader is he's the best CEO I've worked with. I've worked with so many multinational companies. Hardworking, intelligent, disciplined people. Driven, but nobody like him. Nasabayan ko lahat yung multinational executives siya, hindi ko masabayan eh. In other words, his discipline is such that he just follows a routine. To this day, I can see, drives him because of that passion to do good also. I see that in him, a lot of desire to do good for the country. Mahal niya yung bansa eh. So paano mo hindi mamahalin ng taong na nagmamahal sa bansa mo? Diba?
Okay. Let me get to the marketing man. How do you go about defining FBR the brand, FBR the product?
Okay, it rolled out from his EDSA days. Prior to that, he
Yun
maintained.
talaga yung handle, ano? Yes.
Prior to that, he was known as a soldier, a military man, the son of the Foreign Affairs Secretary,
Stiff,
stiff,
colorless, monotonous.
enigmatic, cannot be read, keeps his cards close to his chest,
Yeah.
man of few words, deep thought, but a character that you are not sure of how to read. People would throw brickbats at him for being the cousin of Marcos, but then there was no real controversy surrounding him or hounding him that would give a negative tag to him permanently.
Okay,
So-
you're describing the you're describing the base.
Yeah, but then EDSA happened
Okay.
and everything changed. That became his brand. That became his image. And that image was transformed into a people power image, not accidentally but intentionally, because it attached to the EDSA idea. And that image of EDSA people power attached to the need for reforms. And then he transformed or metamorphosed from the general, the EDSA hero, to only one image, the President of the Republic of the Philippines. At that time, he took on that image so well that he brought a different respectability to the country.
Ano yun, even during the campaign, andun na siya? You think he was already presidential?
No, during the campaign, he was trying to shed off his image as a purely military man. He was campaigning as a presidential candidate, so he was being given his platform for governance, which he pursued with passion, and it was consistent with everything else that was in the press, that in his speeches, etc. There was consistency in the way he was doing things. There was predictability in the way he was doing things, and there was a certain motivation that was given to the people. And at that point, he brought pride back to us as Filipinos. Remember, he brought pride to us as Filipinos in EDSA. That people power revolution was something that we were very proud of, and we're still proud of. But the young people, the millennials, don't really know the feelings that we got. When the world looked up to us, when that happened, people in the streets, the OFWs, were proud to be Filipinos. And that kind of pride carried on for 6 years despite the coup attempts. So I guess we wanted to relieve that pride with Ramos, and so we did. Because he brought us back again to the roadmap of success. If were it not for the Asian crisis, we would have been really in the tiger economy level.
He was also an engineer, and I guess that also influenced a lot of the decisions and a lot of the actions he took.
The composite of a man is what makes his brand.
Okay.
Everything about him, his engineering background, his West Point background, his observing what happened during martial law days. He didn't have to, he was not vocally disagreeing, but he was not agreeing at the same time. He was just quiet, and he allowed things to roll out. He was following Corinthians. There's a time for everything. And the time for him was EDSA. Even if he did not make the move at the right time, EDSA would not have happened. But now during the presidency, our involvement with Titoy Pardo was in the multisectoral conferences. That was significant, because he came to me one day and says, "Tony, alagaan mo yung PCCI." Hindi ko pa kilala sila Titoy Pardo, na naging kumpare ko, na magkaibigan ka, became very close. But
PCCI,
Philippine Chamber of Commerce.
and Industry.
So, Titoy was then the president, brother-in-law of Ting Paterno. And he says, stay close to him, which I did. And the very first thing that we did was we put together the first 100 days multisectoral conference. When he was still president-elect. He had not yet sworn in office. And of course, people will be more than willing to be part of that, to contribute. So we had a one-day workshop seminar, divided everybody into 10 topics, and asked everybody in the 10 topics to draw out the top 10 priorities for the governance of Ramos in the first 100 days. So we submitted to him a list of 100 things to do. Pinag-usap-usapan niya, na-facilitate siya ng gusto.
Parang similar to the exercise of the UPPM.
Yes. No, but this is
convention,
But the convention of UPPM was geared towards identifying the reforms needed by the country in general in broad strokes. And then who would be the leader that we would be needing. So, yun ang gearing nun eh. This one was, what should the president now do in the first 100 days?
Kasi alam na natin kung
So
sino yung leader
10 topics, 10 recommendations. He scored 100% after the first 100 days. When we had a post-100 days multisectoral conference, we announced it. And he loved the multisectoral conference. We must have had 6, 7 of them all throughout his days as president.
And the provincial tours, actually, the provincial visits always involved a multi-sectoral consultation process.
He may not have gotten the highest approval ratings, but he got the approval rating of the world at its highest level.
One thing. So I guess it wasn't really difficult to reshape the man, the candidate, into what could foreseeably become the president.
I mean, not everybody knows the meaning of being the Republic of the Philippines in its totality, in my view. There was a time when President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo called me and said to me, this was when she just got newly elected in the 2004. He says, Tony, I've been having so many images with the help of Dante Ang. I was Gloria Magsasaka, Gloria, si ano ba ito, si Labandera, Gloria na parang si, who's that actress? Guy?
Ate Glo.
Ate Glo. So marami siyang image, sabi niya. As a result of which, I have no image.
Yeah.
Sabi niya, what should be my image? Sabi ko, ma'am, now that you've been elected, you have only one image to support. That of the President of the Republic of the Philippines. When you think about what is that image, that has to have several descriptions, which our current president is not following. To his credit and discredit, I don't know, but he has his own style. The world expects a president kasi to have a certain image.
Yes, that's right.
Trump is also not following that image. What is that? The cajon image that the world gives. Number one, you should be a statesman. Number two, you should be credible. Number three, you must be honest and transparent. Number four, you must have the best interests of your people above your personal interests. I mean, once you can achieve that kind of imaging, then you have given due respect and cognizance to the position that the people voted you into. As I said, not everybody may realize that or even put that in practice.
First 100 days, he's fresh into the presidency, very, very fresh mandate. But at the same time, he's trying to, he won by a plurality, but he's been moving around fairly much. We didn't quite see a change in the pace.
Even worse.
From the campaign to the the presidency.
Got worse.
But you were already you had a pact, no? That you wouldn't take a government post.
But what happened, Toby, was right after he was sworn into office in Luneta, he approached me and my wife, and he says, "Can you continue serving me?" I said, "Of course, sir." Sabi niya, "Annabelle, can you be my spokesperson?
There you are.
And Tony, can you support me from the outside?" Sabi ko, "Sir, gladly." But sabi ko, "Sir, you don't have to ask me. I said, "Sir, you don't need to ask my permission." He said, "You know what he says? I have two, you're the husband." And I said, "Sir, you don't have two. You're my president." And then I became his private poster. I managed all of his surveys. And I became his strategic advisor of sorts. There are many others. I don't claim credit for that. Right after that, forming the multi-sectoral conference was a way of assessing and giving him feedback.
Where you are.
Where we are, etc. But
what was the question? Well, so you were answering the question where you are. What about answering the question where you want to go?
Well, when we discussed it with the Almonte group amongst ourselves, because they normally had meetings outside of Malacanang,
right,
there was a need to really start the campaign on breaking the monopolies.
That specifically,
That was around July, August, pinag-uusapan na namin yan. But the question of what was the handle going to be like.
July, August, sir. It's less than 60 days into the presidency.
Pinag-uusapan na namin yan.
Okay.
Because that was part of his campaign.
Right.
Because that was what was pulling down the country and the economy, the monopolization of many industries here. We had to open up the market.
Okay.
And so the target was PLDT.
Telecommunications.
Yes, which was being held, strictly speaking, by
one family.
The Cojuangco family. And it was, I recall, during the November PCCI Business Conference, they invited Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew over at Shangri-La Hotel. They were very strict with him. They would make sure that there was no smoking whatsoever. Everybody was seated 30 minutes before the arrival of Lee Kuan Yew. So I witnessed that, and by coincidence, Lee Kuan Yew was there seated with the officials of PCCI, President Ramos. I think President Ramos was not there for that particular instance. together with Tony Boy Cubanco. And Lee Kuan Yew did not spare any words, and he says, "I understand this is a country where only 2% of people have telephones, and the majority of them have no dial tones." That was a slap to Tony Boy Cubanco's face. But we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any connections. And at that time, there was this big controversy of the digital network that was won through a bidding during the time of Tita Cory, but was not awarded to the digital group, the Digital Telecommunications Group.
Digital, yeah.
Something like 60 billion against 20 billion.
Yes.
Na-shelve lang yung decision. And this came to our attention. And this was a big situation between the late Eddie Fernandez, who used to be a partner of SGV, and Cable and Wireless. It was during those days that, and I can put this on record, that Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, Sheila Coronel, needed to link up and get information from the side of digital network, whose lawyer happened to be a neighbor in Ayala, Alabang, the late Eduardo de Los Angeles. So my house was used as a meeting place.
For breaking up the monopoly.
Not for breaking up, for discussing what was happening with this Cable and Wireless and digital group.
At this particular
So
case.
on one hand, I would meet with the lawyers of Cable and Wireless, Attorney de Los Angeles being the lead lawyer. And when they had left, the PCIJ group would meet with me to get the feedback, because they could not meet in person. It would be violative of some of their beliefs or their rules of engagement. So we fed the information until PCIJ finally brought it out into the public. There was some kalokohan going on. So that started the ball rolling. But it was not enough, because they had to take over PLDT as a government. And we had to push for that very, very hard. Then we had to define the roadmap for demonopolization and opening up the market. And I was given the request of putting together a multi-sectoral conference once more for Philippines 2000. So there were several meetings held at the office of General Almonte.
That was the very first time that phrase came out.
That's right. It was a visionary goal on what we can achieve as a country by the year 2000. Not knowing that there will be an Asian crisis. People, in fact, mistook it to be a desire of Ramos to stay in power beyond 98. But it was just a goal. In the same way that Mahathir put up his 2020 vision for Malaysia. It was just a goal. It was a target.
It's a roadmap.
It's a roadmap. So, but the roadmap to 2020 was misunderstood by some people. You know how politics are in this country. So they will use every angle that they can to hit you if you're on the opposition side. So long story short, we had to have one affair, multi-sectoral conference. Now again, I hope you don't mind my always referring to the hand of God, because this is a strong belief of mine. Things would not have happened if He did not make it happen this way. During the presidential campaign, one group that invited Secretary Ramos to their gathering was this micro-enterprise group of Attorney Joey Casas. He was one of the pioneers of the micro-enterprise foundations in this country. Patterned after Bangladesh, but the Grameen Bank, but done better because he put values orientation. So he would graduate these micro-entrepreneurs and form a graduation ceremony similar to Rotary Club convention. But you could smell poverty in their convention, because they're not dressed in nice clothes with perfume. You could smell poverty. You could see poverty. They don't have fancy lunches in the hotels. They bring their own baon. But they're happy and they're crying because Joey made them wear togas. These are only elementary school graduates who were taught how to put together a business, support one another, and gainful livelihood. So at one point in time, he was able to get about 500 representatives in Los Baños. And they asked him, "Sir, kung sakasakaling tatakbo kayo, maaari ho ba kang maimbita namin kayo kung presidente na kayo muli?" So this was during the campaign days. So he said, kung sakasakaling tumakbo ka at kung sakasakaling manalo ko, ginagarantiyan ko kayong pupunta ako sa palakpakan. Tapos na yun. Presidente na siya. July, August, September. October was another convention of Joey Casas. Okay. To be held also in Los Baños. Kasi doon lang mura eh. So we wrote him and we said, "Sir, this is an invitation," etc. Pinadaan namin through the normal channels. Hindi ko ginamit yung mga channels ko. No? Ni-reject ng appointments.
Hala.
No? Siguro sa dami na humihingi ng appointments sa kanya, na-reject.
Oh.
This time I had to write him directly. I had to cut through the channels. And I said, "Sir," and I knew what was important for him. I used the magic words that he used on me, on us before with Tita Cory. "Sir, you gave your word."
Oo nga naman.
He gave his word. And he appeared. Okay? On the day that he appeared, the late Rick Gloria, who was then Secretary of DDOST, who lived in Los Baños together with Willie Padulina, who replaced him, heard about the event, that the president was going to be in Los Baños. Of course, he had to be there. So he came over. That was when I first met the two. Willie Padulina's Yusek and Rick Gloria. They were neighbors. They were both scientists. And I said to the two of them, "Look, we need a department, a vehicle to announce Philippines 2000. Can you be it?" DOST. So we used DOST. That was November, mid-November. We used October, November. We used DOST to launch it in Manila Midtown Hotel. You still have the document of Philippines 2000. That was a very significant document. That launched the demonopolization campaign. And in the speech of President Ramos, we actually wrote a few lines for him to say that would tell the world that the demonopolization was coming. He expanded what we wrote into a full paragraph, and we knew he was serious. That's kaya humanga kami sa kanya doon. And the fight, we had, Toby, it was a David Goliath fight with PLDT, but we stood our ground. And we won. And of course, we proved to Tony Boy Cojanco that it would serve him well. It would make him even richer.
Exactly.
That opened up the telecoms industry.
Yeah. But the telecommunications industry or sector may have been the first, but FVR didn't focus just on that. I mean,
he had,
banking,
mining, transportation,
di ba? So,
the maritime industry, lahat binuksan niya. Insurance, lahat. Yeah, that's why we were buoyant as an economy. That's why we were noticed by the world. That's why we were nearing newly industrialized country. That's why the NICOD was just within spitting distance. Sayang, if it were not for the Asian crisis.
Well, we actually got to Tiger Cub economy status.
That's right. That's right.
Our coming out party in '96 was the the Apex Summit.
That's right. So people will look back at history and see that Ramos was indeed the president that we wanted him to be, and he did not fail us.
Well, one of the first things he did was he turned the lights on, right?
Of course.
Literally.
Of course. I mean, that was fast also. I mean, it's not easy to be a leader in any organization, but more so in a country that was in the shape that we were at that time. So he was able to contribute to a very significant part of this history, this country's history, in bringing out reforms. And these reforms are not yet finished. That's why he's identified President Duterte as somebody who might be able to carry on the reforms and make it his own legacy as well. That's the whole reason for the October 18. Hopefully, we make that happen.
More. It became also a platform for him as builder. I mean, the entire 6 years of his presidency was spent on
he built the
bringing
economy.
down a few and then rebuilding it and reshaping it.
He built the economy. He built the nation. He built trust. He built respect. He built the way the world would look at us. But sadly, 2 decades passed and we did not gain from those building blocks. We did not put more building blocks. I mean, to give credit to all presidents, I mean, they had their own contributions, but it was not enough to build Ramos built the foundations, the solid foundations for growth. They did not use the building blocks to achieve what we should have achieved by now.
Yep. Hindi,
Two
ano,
decades
hindi
passed.
dinagdagan, ano?
We could have towered.
May mga ilang gaps lang, sir, during the campaign. Lakas tao.
How did it form?
Well, lakas tao, the party, was supposed to be the political party. This was already after the loss in
Yes.
the LDP primary, ano. Ganun din eh. People power din. Tinagalog lang.
Well,
Were you were you
Almonte
also responsible for branding that? for
Almonte
coining
asked me before,
Uh-huh.
we're putting already a party, what should we name it?
Okay.
So this was logical, not sense that God-given. I just said, we're pushing for people power. Just translate people power to Tagalog, lakas tao. And apparently, President Ramos then was also thinking about the same thing. So I would give him credit. I will not take the credit.
Okay.
It was just a question that was asked of me. But apparently, he had suggested the same thing to Almonte. Huwag na lang natin lakas tao. Then we had to merge with the NUCD, UMDP, to put some political savviness to it. And
Some ideology.
plus, to be registered with the COMELEC. Hindi registered yung lakas tao. We needed the registered entity.
Okay. But how was that was supposed to distinguish
The party from the traditional.
as against, diba, as an alternative, ano, to
Well, just like
traditional.
what's happening in this country ever since, there's no permanent party. It's a party of politicians, where the nucleus emanates, which is the presidency. The politicians will gravitate like cells being wanting to gravitate around that nucleus.
How did you guys neutralize Miriam? I mean, she was extremely popular, ano, and she was verbose. The gift of wit and gab, as against, at about that time, FVR was still metamorphosing into, diba?
He was still building his brand.
Right.
He was not yet seen as a president.
Right. And Miriam was,
Miriam had that.
eating death threats for breakfast.
Miriam had that strong perception of a feisty woman
Yeah.
who could have been the president. But I don't think there was any major effort to neutralize her per se, in terms of negative imaging, etc. I don't recall any attempt at trying to paint a negative picture of her by the group of Ramos or Almonte. What happened was they just strengthened where we had our core strengths. And they strengthened the people power branding and the people power campaign. And they wanted to communicate to the people that we have good governance in our mind. Of course, nobody knew that Ramos was serious about demonopolization, but we just kept pushing the agenda. That's how it was. That just happened. We let the people decide, and we knew the numbers. We knew the numbers were very thin. So, on top of that, you neutralize the political cheating,
Yeah.
and that the support of the Cory administration being given to Ramos helped a lot, because you now have the government bureaucracy watching over the people who might do certain actions that would be inimical to the interests of good politics. So that's how it was really a good campaign strategy.
I guess also having been from the military, FVR, and his
They had an organization.
band of,
They had an
military
organization that was
officials,
at work.
to let's just keep it straight and
I knew that there was a lot of intel information being passed around, and if you call that a means of neutralizing, yes, that's information is power. So if you know what the other side is doing, you can neutralize their efforts if need be.
So, crucial, again, I'm touching base with the marketing and communications man in you. So crucial talaga yung role ng communications, and the principle of right message, right time, right man, or right messenger.
But it's more, Toby, because of perception building.
Okay.
Uh,
Sige, let's go there.
the whole campaign capitalized on the perception of who Ramos was, building on the idea that who Ramos could be. That was the critical fusion of ideas.
Okay.
Who he was a military man hero, but who he could be was not known to people. That he had this vision for the country. Mahirap i-deploy yun during the campaign because people will say, pangako lang yan, just like it's more of the same. So we had to make sure that there was enough credibility there. And of course, on top of that, there was an identified disgusto from the population with traditional politicians, which played up to our favor.
And you capitalized
We
on it.
capitalized on that. It's a fight now of David Goliath, but the Goliath was seen as a tradpole. Doon din namin sila winasa. Lalo na when there was that incident at Batasang Pambansa.
Yeah, that printing press.
That printing press incident.
Yeah.
Wala na, taob na sila doon.
Oh, and that effectively neutralized Speaker Mitra.
That neutralized him, that weakened him terribly,
Yeah.
but also gave positive points to the Ramos campaign.
Right.
Now, the other part of perception is winnability. People want to go with the winners. What we did not get at that time was the youth vote. Because it was Miriam that captured the sentiments of the youth, which is why I think right now I see President Ramos putting emphasis to the millennials, because he wants to tell the millennials, understand what happened in EDSA and bring it forward now. I can no longer do it myself. It's up to you to do it with your new leader, the skipper of the ship.
Was it altogether a successful run, the FVR presidency, all 6 years of it?
I think there were a few mishaps, a few gaps, but all told, yes, on a score of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, I would rate him 9.5
Talaga?
as president. As president. He delivered what he promised he would do and more, actually. And the more extended beyond his presidency. This is now, 30 years after? And he's still supporting the nation the way he supported us as president. No longer as chief of staff, no longer as military man, but as president, bringing back that respectability, that honor to the country.
Was there enough time to accomplish
No.
what he set out?
6 years is never enough for a good president. It's too much for a bad president, as we have seen. That's a lesson in history that we must understand.
Yeah. Where was he lacking?
President Ramos, time.
Time.
He only had more time.
But there was an attempt actually to give him more time. You remember that? People's Initiative.
There was
Firma.
there was a feeble attempt and an ill-timed attempt to do charter change in a way that it was done. No,
Where were you with that? Were you?
I was the author of the word Firma,
Okay. All right.
but I don't claim credit for having brought it out. I didn't want to bring it out. They just asked me what can we think of as a slogan. Kaya ako yung slogan nila. So
you
People's
coined
Initiative, I coined it for reform, etc., etc.
modernization. And
But I didn't want to release it. Noel Oñate, I'm giving him credit for this, took the name and pushed it out in the papers.
Yep.
Which is, I say, ill-timed and premature. So nag-react ang bansa, nag-react yung mga politicians. So it fizzled out because of that, sayang. Because at that time, it was not yet established that we needed a longer period of time for President Ramos to do what he wanted to do. In fact, there's an interesting sidebar story. When in one of my dinner meetings with Tito Ipardo, who is known to be a very close, trusted friend of Erap Estrada, before he became president, classmate, TOYM co-awardee, he invited me and Robert Aventado to a dinner meeting, and we just exchanged ideas. And we discussed the possibility of President Erap, or then Vice President Erap, agreeing to support the charter change and give a term extension to Ramos of at least 3 years.
Why Erap? Because he
Well,
was
because he was
probably the
already-
most
Because all the surveys show that he would be the winningest
Shoo-in,
candidate. And so we said 3-3. Give a term extension of 3 years, or 6 years, but he will give his word that he will only sit down for 3 years to prepare Erap Estrada
wow.
and to tide us over the Asian crisis, to see us through the year 2000. So ako sabi ko, okay, I will communicate that to President Ramos, the team. Kayo na bahala sa team ni Erap Estrada. Well, from what I had gathered, Robert did his job, communicated it, but the response given by the Zamora brothers was, are we crazy? We have it in the bag. Why should we give it up now?
Yeah.
Sayang. If they did, they would have had 9 years instead of 2.5 years. Di ba?
Oo nga, no?
You look at it.
Yeah.
All we needed was 3 years to see us through the Asian crisis and into the year 2000. And here's the baton now to you, Erap.
He
Now
will
you-
step down.
That was an agreement that could have been made. History did not make it happen. Remember, only pawns, the kings and the queens and the bishops had to make decisions.
Let's make the decisions.
So we were just the pawns pushing the being pushed in the chessboard. We did not succeed in doing a knight captures queen.
Sayang. Chess player. No, but where did you stand on it?
It was premature, ill-timed, and it was not hatched successfully. This is where the perceptions game. I was not asked to be part of it. This was where the perceptions game of those who were involved in it failed. They did not understand nor use the fact that Ramos was not yet at that point where people would clamor for him. They needed people to clamor for him to get Pirma going.
So here we are again.
Persado,
Right
mahirap-
message, right
Mahirap
time.
yung persado eh. Di ba? Lalabanan ka ng tao. All you need is a little pitik-pitik here and there and you get toppled down.
But it was supposed to be, well, some other Ramos-associated group that...
They thought about
Push
it. They
that.
thought that they might be able. They were trying to read it. But Ramos himself was not totally in favor of it.
Yeah.
Remember what he said earlier. Power that is grabbed will only be grabbed and we will be a banana republic. So he stood by that, I guess. But in another way. But because you don't have to grab power constitutionally. As was done under the constitutional authoritarianism of Marcos. Did you know, Toby, that I'm told that there's a book on constitutional authoritarianism in UP. UP Library. When you look at the library card, the most number of borrowings came from a guy by the name of Ferdinand Adelin Marcos.
Yeah.
So not surprisingly, that was his pattern or his basis for declaring constitutional authoritarianism also in this country. Finorsh niya yung constitution to support his being a dictator. Okay. So when the Japanese asked him, Mr. President, what form of government do you have in your country? Sabi niya, constitutional authoritarianism. Dictatorship. Sinasabi ng Hapon.
Yeah. Put succinctly. Teka, yun na lang just a few dun sa administration. So you remained largely
Below the radar.
private, below the radar, but you said you were still doing polls and
I was doing his
some
polls mostly.
strategy advice for
Every time they ask my help, I help.
Uh-huh.
I don't go out of my way to volunteer if I'm not needed.
Will you volunteer a few of those polls that you did?
Well, okay. We always monitor his ratings
Okay. Image, perception.
over and beyond the tracking
Performance.
studies
Okay.
because in 1992, one of the persons who helped us a lot was a dear friend of mine, Rosie Chu, the late Rosie Chu, who's the mother of surveys or market research companies in this country. She started the research industry. Came from Procter & Gamble.
Yeah, PNG.
when it was time for us to do some surveys, and we did not have enough money because we were not LDP, I had to appeal to her as a colleague from PNG, but I didn't have to appeal to her too much because she believed in Ramos.
Okay. She was
So,
a believer.
She was a believer. So with the little money I had for surveys, she gave me this much for this much money,
Wow.
when I should have paid that much for that survey. So si Ramos has a very deep sense of gratitude. So when she finally won, he says to me, Tony, kailangan pasalamatan ko yung kailangan kong pasalamatan. Pwede mong tawagin si Rosie dito para pasalamatan ko personally. I told that to Rosie Chu. She says, no need, Tony. Sabihin mo na he's done, just do a good job. But one day, Rosie Chu calls me.
Okay.
And she says, Tony, I'm not asking this for myself. I'm asking this for President Ramos.
Okay.
Sabi niya, what is that? There's a lady who's visiting me, a well-known researcher, anthropologist, double degree holder. Her name is Scarlett Epstein, who was then about 70 years old. Her background was she was 14 years old, and she was when her family nearly escaped from the Holocaust
All right.
and landed in London. And she was the only breadwinner in the family at 14 years old because she spoke a smattering of English.
Yeah.
She was a seamstress, mananahe. But she saw herself through college and a double PhD.
Wow.
And she was Jewish, married a Jew, Dr. Epstein. By that time, she had already double degree in anthropology and research, etc. She wanted to meet Ramos to give him a message.
Ooh.
Okay, so I arranged a meeting. We went to Malacanang. This is what she said. Mr. President, I'm here to only give you two messages. Number one, it's pro. The other one is con.
Okay.
In support of and against surveys. He says, please explain. Well, if you want to help your country as you're now the new president, please do a lot of DMRs, development market research. He says, explain. Before you do any project in any community, survey the
Find out,
community.
yeah.
Find out what they really need, because oftentimes we did a survey worldwide, sabi niya. The survey, the projects that had no DMR, most of them failed. And those that failed, half of those that failed, even had the reverse impact in the communities they wanted to serve. So do your DMR properly. Sabi ni Ramos, ask Tony here, I do multiple surveys. Oh, what's con? Sabi niya. In the recently held surveys in England, 3 of the top pollsters declared unequivocally the win of the Labour Party against Margaret Thatcher. They all ended up scratching their heads. So sabi ni Ramos, he was curious.
At that time. Yeah.
What happened? What went wrong? These are the 3 top surveyors. Sabi niya, well, they did not do enough qualitative surveys. They did quantitative surveys, which is basically the tracking studies of both Pulse Asia and SWS. Kasi the surveys that are being done by Pulse Asia and SWS give you an indication of sentiments at that point that they survey them. And they're good surveys. They're not Kenkoy surveys. But they are not deep enough to look at the nuances. Randy David wrote an article that was really right on in terms of analyzing these surveys. I've yet to contact him soon.
Okay.
So, yung qualitatives or the focus group discussions are very important.
Yes.
As a basis for understanding deeper. That's why we were able to do the
Perception.
Danding, Cojuangco, Imelda Marcos survey.
Yeah.
So it came out of a focus group qualitative survey. Oo nga pala, no? Kailangan pala natin malaman kung anong pakiramdam ng tao. When you find that out qualitatively, you design a survey to do a quantitative feedback and analysis and a rating. This is how you do qualitative quantitatives. And Ramos heard that early on and started doing multiple surveys, which I coordinated with and for him.
Well, which was why I guess you were kept on.
Well, in
in a
1995,
private,
in 1995, Toby, in 1995, for example, we've managed to do what we call the weekly, kasi dati ang bigay ng surveys every 1 month panis na yung resulta, doon lang lumalabas.
Bago ka mag-react.
So we needed to cut it down to at least a week, but we could, the best we could do was 10 days. No? But we managed 1 week. And so we were able to do a weekly survey for the senatorial elections of 1995.
Yeah, the midterms.
Luckily, we had the surveys going on every week because that was when we got hit with floor contemplation.
Contemplation.
Okay, and so unang tanong sa akin ni Ramos pagdating niya dito was, how do the surveys look? Sabi ko, sir, they don't look good, but the first attack is against the people in Singapore, the embassy, Bensuceso, Ambassador Bensuceso. Sila pinagbibintangan.
Yes.
The second bintang is with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Dole. The third bintang is with you.
Yeah.
You're only 8% bintang.
Going up the line. Yeah.
But sabi ko, bababa sa inyo ho yan. So, with that knowledge, he attacked it right away. He announced in Camp Crame something to at least neutralize the blame on him. No? But that did not... eventually, it did happen. From the embassy to the Dole and Romulo. And so, not surprisingly, Romulo and Dole and Secretary Defensor were asked to resign.
He had to let go of the key embassy officials and had to let go of Romulo and Confessor.
Although my survey said it didn't matter anymore.
Talaga?
Oh, I told that to him. It didn't matter. But it was politics. You don't want to risk it.
Perception is,
You don't want to risk it. But it wouldn't have mattered. The ones who would have won would have won. The ones who would have lost would have lost.
Okay.
And then the survey of Loren Legarda was very significant.
Loren
Legarda wanted to be recommended to the party. And we went to Ramos and said, sir, in the next election you need at least 2 women, preferably media savvy, may itsura, may intelligente. Sabi, sino minamanok nyo?
That's where Loren.
Sabi ko, sir, wala kami minamanok, humingi lang permission sumama sa party. So she turns to me and says, anong score niya sa survey, Tony? Sabi ko, well, based on the chop suey list, yung early days, wala pang announcement. Mga 16, 17, sir. Sabi niya, paano mananalo yan? Again, I will invoke the Holy Spirit. Kasi hindi ko naman inisip Pumasok lang sa isip ko Pag pumasok sa isip mo, hindi mo inisip na tawag doon, multo. Diba? Yung multo ang tawag Holy Spirit. Diba?
Okay.
So, ito yung pumasok sa isip ko. On the spot, Toby. Sabi ko, sir, why don't we conduct a survey, all women senatorial balls? Let's do it nationwide. Presidente ka you can snap of a finger, order that. That's a good idea, let's do it. Survey of all senatorial balls. Who won? Number 1 was Loren Legarda.
Yeah.
Number 3 was Imelda Marcos.
Oh my gosh.
Number 12 was Leti Shahani. If Leti Shahani, who was already a senator, would only get number 12, Loren Legarda, logic says, will also win. So pinapasok namin si Loren.
And she became.
And she became even number 1.
Yeah.
And she became number 1. She proved.
She topped that.
She topped even the men.
Yes.
Diba?
Yes.
Because yun naman, hindi naman kagagawa niya. Tumulong lang kami ng konti kay Tony Luiste, pero I would give that attribution to Tony and Loren running a very good and tight campaign. I give them that credit on record.
Yeah, and she was a hard worker as well. Okay. So doon, maraming nakatulong ng surveys. Surveys gives you indications, feedback, reactions, etc. Yeah, and FVR, like using it,
He validates and cross-validates.
Ang VNB, validate and verify. It's not just, 1 or 2, but he used it.
He uses
as a pretty good governance
information
and management tool.
Yes, he does so. And the beauty about him is he does his homework.
Yeah.
And he works a lot. He works very hard a lot. I have seen him work with piles of paper in the morning that are done before noon, and another batch by noon that are done by 6 p.m., and another batch at night that are done by 12 midnight. So where do you find the energy, the time as president to do all of that? And each document is marked by him with his red pen. I cannot match that CEO.
That's workaholic.
So don't be surprised why I serve him right now, because hindi siya pinagsisilbihan ko. Pag pinagsilbihan ko siya, pinagsisilbihan ko yung mga anak mo, yung mga anak natin na nandito sa Pilipinas. That's how I see life. The time I spend right now with him is just an extra time that I can afford to give, even if I have other priorities.
But you've continued the relationship with him through the years, It didn't just end in...
I continue to believe in what he's doing.
Yeah.
If he did something else different from what he's doing, I would have left.
You would have, yeah. So what has kept it going on, Tony? I mean,
What has kept it going on is what you see around here.
mhm.
He's going on like the ever-ready battery up to now, non-stop.
Ano pa rin, ano? Yeah. Yeah,
Diba?
he's still
Non-stop.
at it, no?
He's still at it. I mean,
At his
he's,
age.
he's not just proof of the concept, he's the concept itself of good governance.
Uh-huh.
Diba? He's proven it over and over again.
Mhm.
And even if he's not able to articulate it the way he would have wanted to articulate it,
Mhm.
you have to look at the nuances of what he's saying.
Yeah, tell me about that. I mean, yeah. So,
Remember, he's a man who used to keep his cards close to his chest.
lalim.
Malalim siya mag-isip.
Mhm.
But I was able to extract from Almonte
Mhm.
the humble beginnings of the way they thought as young cadets.
Yeah.
They were in the Sierra Madre Mountains
Yeah.
on a mission.
Yeah. Joel shared
Shared that with you where
that incident. Those
where
series of
for several weeks they were not supposed to communicate with the outside world. And just looking at the stars at night and looking at the country, they try to envision what this country can be, should be.
Mhm.
And so they set the discussions around the benchmarks of what they wanted to do as soldiers with great love for this country. And that's where it started. And they've been very consistent since then, both of them. All through the years when they went to Vietnam, they followed a consistent path that not very many would do, and a path that's worth emulating. These are two people who could have taken a different course in history, but they did not. But to that extent, I respect them. And the little that I do to serve them is service to the country, not just service to them.
What do you, is there a favorite FVR moment for you? Is there a most memorable moment you have of FVR? The two of you.
There are many to let just a single one stand out.
Okay.
I guess that day when he appeared before us, before my wife and I, in our front door, and announcing that we were the first one he visited to say thank you to, is significant, very significant.
He was a very personal fellow, no?
Yes, he
And
had
then
that personal touch.
Oh, no, yeah.
Marunong siyang humimas ng tao as a leader.
And he knew the right,
Buttons.
touching the right, no? Pressing the right buttons.
But there was a time that
And
I also felt bad. Not towards
so?
him, but towards what he did not do.
Okay.
If you don't mind my explaining it.
Go ahead.
I was attending regular meetings in Malacanang with the close-in group, particularly the ones who are attending to the media also. There's a big table, and we just kidded around that the president then was still Ilocano at heart and did not feed us enough. So
He did that all throughout.
so what we did was jokingly we would announce to him that there's a birthday party. So we'd just we would just take turns in hosting a lunch
Okay.
to our desire. But one day there were some critical issues.
Okay.
I forgot what they were. But I remember the late Rene Cayetano saying, Tony, ikaw na muna magpasakali. Ilabas yung latest survey results, which were not too appealing at that time because you know how surveys are, they go up and down.
Yeah.
And we had many problems of governance at that time. So they said, umpisa mo muna. Sabi ko, pero pag nalaman niyo yung results ng survey, tapos medyo uminit-init ang diskusyon, baka hindi niyo saluhin. Sabi, hindi, huwag ka magalala, sasaluhin namin.
Okay.
And sabi niya, kung if this topic that we had to talk about has to be brought to the Supreme Court, sabi niya, ako na bahala. Sabi ni Rene Cayetano. So everybody was around that frame of mind that umpisahan ko muna, sasaluhin nila. So the president comes over after we had lunch and says, kamusta kayo? So, sabi nila, sir, si Tony mag-umpisa dahil may sasabihin niya yata about the surveys.
Okay.
So he discussed what it was. The survey results are like this. He said he found out that the survey results were not so flattering. He may or may not have been affected. He may or may not have slept well that night. He may have had a lot of pressures. But when I said, sir, they want to discuss with you a few things that are important, and they would like to discuss the strategies on how we will achieve these results. Galit siya. He took his papers and he threw it on the table and said, usap kayo ng strategy, wala naman nangyayari. He turned his back to us and just left us all
Walk
hanging
out.
with our tongues. I said to the rest of the group, ano nangyari? Akala ko sasaluhin nyo.
Where did that come from?
Akala ko sasaluhin nyo.
Oh.
But I felt, although it was not meant, a bit insulted by the fact that the president gave his ire towards me when I didn't deserve it. And I did not have a chance to explain. So, the reason why I do not like to accept any position or any emoluments from any government politician is ayoko magmukhang walang utang na loob. Diba? Ayoko magkaroon ng utang na loob due to that. No? I do it professionally.
And you don't seem to be one who would be a yes man.
No, so I take care of my family. Pag pinakain mo pamilya ko, may utang na loob ako sa'yo. Pero at that point, hindi ako empleyado mo, I can walk out anytime.
Yeah.
That's my feeling. So I was upset. I was not able to take that sitting down. So I wrote a 2 or 3 page letter.
Okay.
The longest I written him was 8 pages before.
Wow.
Pag nagsusumbong ako, 2 pages, 3 pages. So this time I said to him, Sir, ito ang sinabi ng mga tao. They wanted to talk to you because of this, because of that. And I'm sure that he read that. Because he's the type of person who reads everything.
Yeah.
So he read that, but this is what I admire about him. He not only reads, he takes action.
Yes.
So alam niya may damdam ako.
Yeah.
So some weeks passed and he says, because at that point I gave some recommendations. I got a call from Malacanang, he says, and they said, Sir, inimbita ka ng Presidente to attend an affair in Nichols.
Okay.
So I attended. I didn't know why I was supposed to be there, but it was just one of those affairs. And after that, the PSG came to me and says, Sir, sabayan niyo daw maglakad, may pupuntahan pa tayo. So while we were walking, he comes to me and says to me, tanggap ko yung sulat mo ha. I acted on everything that you wrote there. That was it. Pati na kami. Hindi wala na yung sama ko ng loob. Marunong siya humimas ng tao.
Yeah.
Alam niya pag may sama ng loob.
Yeah.
To that extent, I consider him a great leader.
Particularly, for the people who meant to him. So, if I understand correctly, that he gets mad at someone is a badge of honor of sorts, because you know that, well, at least that's what they say. You know that you're in his radar.
When he can express his anger,
Yeah.
not towards you, but towards things.
Yeah. When
There was a time when my wife was working with him early on as a spokesperson, and he was probably very stressed at that time. So as my wife was going, he yells out something and then he throws the paper all over. So Annabelle started picking up the paper. It was not addressed towards her. It was an expression of his stress.
Yeah.
So Annabelle picks up the papers and he says to her, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. You know what Annabelle said to him? Sir, it is okay. You can express your anger to me anytime. It's just me. That's how they became good friends as well.
Yeah.
Kasi kailangan maintindihan mo siya as a human being. He's able to take stress more than any of us. And he's able to manage it very well. But he's entitled to a few bursts every now and then.
Yeah. Like anyone.
Like anyone. But more than anyone, he controls it. Cool and collected. Soldier and gentleman.
Steady Eddie nga.
Steady Eddie. Di ba?
My last question, Tony, generally is, what would you consider to be FVR's greatest legacy as president?
Oh, that's...
And does it still hold today?
Okay, let me ponder upon that thought a little bit. His greatest legacy is being the greatest president so far we've ever had.
Okay.
That he carried on up to now with the love of his nation. Which is why he's pinpointed President Duterte, hopefully, as a person who will carry the baton of that legacy and transform it on his own to become the new keeper of the ship, to quote him. His greatest legacy is his love for country. That's his greatest legacy to this country. And the future generations should take note of that. Very deep love for country as expressed in action, not just in words. It's easy to express this in words, but to try to mean it not just through the 6 years of your presidency, but throughout your life and beyond your presidency, not just on a year-to-year basis, not just on a month-to-month basis, not just on a day-to-day basis, but even on a per-hour basis. The way this man works, his mind is geared towards that. What can I do for my country? I've never seen somebody with that kind of passion for country. If you really see through him, that's exactly what motivates him. It is not self-image. In fact, in the recent expression of recognition by the UCCP, I heard him say in this room, don't give me credit for that. Don't put my name in there. Make it a neutral name. Okay, so that's...
I'll probably end it here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.